either live by the gun or you die by the sword.
Welcome to The Good, the Bad, and the Weird. I'm Nicho.
And I'm Chris.
And Happy New Year's, everyone.
We did it. We made it.
Finally, 2021. We are actually recording this New Year's Day, which I think we did almost the exact same thing last year.
Tradition. Also, it's very convenient because we don't work today.
Yes, exactly. I think that's why we did it last year, too. So, first off, I do want to thank everyone who's given us a listen this past year.
Yeah.
It's been a fantastic year for us.
Yeah, we've had a blast doing it, and honestly, the fact that more than our parents listen really surprises us.
Yeah. No, it's been fun.
Yeah.
So, and unlike what we did last year, where we decided to watch a movie that we hadn't seen before, due to circumstances always,
yeah.
We decided to go with something a little more uplifting, and we kind of went in animated direction again.
Yeah. But this time we're roping in the anime world. It's not just animation. This is a full-length anime movie.
Yes, and we are going into one of my favorite directors.
Yes.
The famous Satoshi Kon.
Yes.
And we are doing one of his, well,
I would say this is one of the most popular ones he's done.
It's his most normative one, but
sure.
It's the outlier in his entire library.
Yes.
We are doing Tokyo Godfathers.
A classic. Also a little Christmassy.
Yeah.
Finish off the season.
Christmassy and New Year's.
Yeah, it definitely is.
It's one of those movies that that actually fits in between those two time frames, kind of like The Family Man.
Yeah.
Yeah. So for our drinks today, we actually have two.
We do. This is one of the few movies that we have options with.
Yes. So first off, we went with the bougiest water we could think of and find.
Fiji water.
Fiji water. I don't think I've had it.
It's water.
Yeah.
Only the finest will do.
No tap. Only the finest for my baby. What bottled water. And we have something a little fitting.
Yes.
We have the Snow Maiden sake from Tozai.
Mm-hmm.
So, cheers to that.
Cheers. Very pretty.
It is.
Ooh, that's nice.
Yes. So, Tokyo Godfathers.
Yes.
As previously mentioned, it is a 2003 animated film, and is the third film by the late Satoshi Kon.
Yes.
This film actually took 2.5 years for framework and production.
Yeah.
Which is
pretty
crazy.
It's pretty long.
And I'll go into why that took that level, because it has like the same level of detailing of like Akira.
Yes, this is a delightfully visual movie.
Yeah. And for those who don't know, Kon is considered one of the most influential animated film directors.
Yeah.
I'll go into a little bit about him, but I don't want to go too far into him because we are going to be doing a future episode
on just him.
Yes,
yeah.
Exactly.
Because his works are, like, every one of them is a whole can of worms to unpack.
Oh yeah, and they've all been influential to a certain degree.
Yeah.
So as well as Satoshi Kon directing Tokyo Godfathers, he co-wrote this film along with I might butcher this name, Neko Nobumoto.
Mm-hmm.
Who is better known for her work as the head screenwriter of Cowboy Bebop.
Which I adore Cowboy Bebop.
It's one of my classic animes.
Yeah.
As well as she was the creator of Wolf's Rain.
Which also delightfully good.
One that was on Adult Swim around the same time Satoshi Kon's other work, Paranoia Agent, was, that I never got around to until, well, I got to Paranoia Agent recently, but not that. So, the story itself, a lot of Western fans will recognize the basis of the story.
Yeah.
It's based off the 1913 best-selling novel, The Three Godfathers by Peter B. Kyne.
Yeah.
The stories do differ, where The Three Godfathers follows three bank robbers who find a child. And the child doesn't show up until like an hour into at least the 1984 John Wayne. adaptation.
And I think even in the book, it's like halfway through the book before the kid shows up.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a lot more character building.
Yeah, and there's 2 other movies that came before in 1916 and 1936. I unfortunately couldn't find either of those.
Bummer. They're out there somewhere, I'm sure.
Yeah, the John Wayne one is actually entertaining.
Yeah, and, it's John Wayne. How can you go wrong?
Yep. And then I saw a mention on Wikipedia about this one that I kind of forgot about this movie, and it is very similar in nature. Ice Age.
Yeah.
The first one.
This is... Essentially, Ice Age is a retelling of this story, but they used kind of similar tropes as this version. Yeah, three dumbasses find a baby.
Yeah, basically.
Yeah.
So, I do want to go a little bit over Satoshi Kon, just slightly.
Sure.
So, to give as people perspective who haven't seen any of Kon's work previously, or only have seen 1 or 2, Kon's overall work is broadly just, they generally deal with females as the lead.
Yeah.
And that's partly because Kon has this, he knows that he couldn't write a male counterpart to the characters he wrote because, how does he explain it? In this essay, that's pulled from another source as well, Cinema Anime, Excuse Me, Who Are You? Performances, The Gaze, and the Female in the Works of Satoshi Kon by Susan Napier. Kon explained that he can project his obsession onto the character and expand the aspects that he wants to describe, whereas the male counterpart, he would have so many criticisms because he is a male and is thinking from a male's point of view. And
truthfully, even from outsider's standpoint, the characters that he always manages to create are generally not ones who need a side character to complete them in any way or to bring out any characteristics. He does a really nice job of writing every individual as a full individual.
Yes.
As opposed to someone who needs to be pushed out the door for help. Even in this movie, and we'll go through that, yes, there's a gang of 3 people. They all have troubles. They all have to work together to overcome that, but none of them overcome it because of the others.
Yes.
They overcome all of their obstacles on their own, and that's kind of a theme throughout his writing, something that a lot of people really like. And I think it honestly really helps bring out his stories more clearly, because you're not dealing with characters who show up for 10 seconds and then disappear, and then you're like, why were they here again?
Yeah.
There's no extra.
Yeah, he builds on everything, and slowly, he's great at developing characters through the story rather than doing flashbacks and providing so much backlog.
He also does a really nice job of creating, especially in an anime world, we're used to having very fake characters that you're supposed to relate to, and the side characters are what are supposed to help bring out different emotions or backstory, like you mentioned, and his writing and his works generally don't need that. He does a beautiful job of creating very real people who are already embedded with life and their own history to them, and the story is what brings that out, not other characters.
Oh yeah, exactly. So just to give a little bit of information from Napier's essay. Her essay was written shortly after Tokyo Godfathers was released.
Okay.
So there's not a lot of perspective into it, but it does focus heavily on his 2 previous movies, Perfect Blue and Millennium Actress.
Perfect Blue, solid.
And Millennium Actress, solid.
I'll have to get to that one.
I finally got around to it last week. So
nice.
I actually have seen all of Satoshi Kon's work finally.
Brag away.
Well, to be fair, his library is pretty small.
Oh, sure, yeah.
We've just talked about, besides Paprika, that's his entire collection.
Yeah.
And something Rose.
I can't remember.
It's part of a short. So.
Yeah, I don't remember that one's title.
So a little perspective into the animation, because there's not a whole lot of interviews on some of these movies.
Yeah.
One little bit of trivia that I actually kind of liked is that the animators were having a hard time figuring out how to animate people in heavily bundled clothing.
Yes, it is a challenge.
And so they actually had Kon, his wife, and a producer out in the park in the middle of summer, bundled up to get motion studies.
Which, I mean, is really helpful, too, because, A, this movie takes place throughout winter.
Mm-hmm.
And it takes place in Tokyo winter, which is cold and is definitely snowing.
Yes.
And so, yeah, if there's not a part where the clothing in this movie it doesn't feel natural or correct. Like, there's a lot of, especially in snow movies, we see the heavy clothing as either like a gag or an afterthought, or as we've discovered with our Christmas selection, a lot of them just kind of forget that it's cold outside and run off in their pajamas.
Yeah.
So, like, I really like the details in this movie, and the clothing and the way that the characters look, and also, like, the different selection of character types is really refreshing in this movie.
Oh, yeah.
There's not, like, the generic background anime person. Everyone looks like a real human.
Oh, yeah, and I want to go into some of the detail later on, just because the amount is insane.
Oh, for sure.
For most of this film, it's actually drawn at eye level to give a sense of realism.
Helps a lot.
It does. And then on top of that, like, there's just a complexity that they add to everything. It's not really fanciful, which is weird in Kon's work, because most of his movies blend reality and psychedelic elements or illusion.
Yeah, this one is a very almost slice of lifey tragedy comedy, where it's not really pulling from anywhere over the top, with the exception of a couple of key story plot, arguably fantasy tropes, but like even then they're quickly dismissed as Christmas miracles.
Yes and no, and then just also the level of like little detail that
the little details
the animators like and Kon added to it.
For sure.
So to get into the movie, it opens up with a rendition of Silent Night, and a narrative performed at a nativity performance of a group of homeless people.
Yes.
And we are introduced to our first two protagonists.
Yeah.
Hana, who is a transgender homeless man or woman.
Yeah.
They don't really define what she's preferred, so
I think Hana herself prefers she makes it pretty clear throughout the movie that she would very much like to be a woman/mom.
Yeah.
But the whole movie's kind of running gag is that she was formerly a drag queen. She's not a fully transitioned person, and also like she's homeless, so she's doing the best she can, but like she's doing the best she can.
Exactly. She's just being herself.
She is unapologetically herself.
Yeah. While our other protagonist, Gin, is sleeping.
Yes. And I like the two of them together. She's a real, like, Spitfire go-getter, and he spends most of this movie trying to overcome being, like, the depressed, no, I failed, just leave me here to die sort of mindset. And so the two of them together...
The booze hound.
Very much so. And so straight from the beginning, we get to see their dynamics with each other, and we don't really care too much about their, like, we don't need to see their full backstory, flashback style, like we would normally get with this sort of film.
Well, and that's exactly the point that I was mentioning at the beginning, is that we get little snippets as we go, and I do want to break down them a little bit as we go, just because
their character detail is wonderful. It's
just in their environments and everything too. So like I mentioned, we do learn their reasons for being there. Yes. Hana is genuinely there for the service as well, because she connects with the Virgin Mary.
She does, but also throughout the whole movie, it's made more and more clear that Hana's a Christmas whore and loves fucking Christmas.
Yeah.
And like, if she had a house, it would be covered in snowmen and Santa Clauses.
Yeah, and Gin doesn't take anything seriously. He even mocks, like, the sermons and stuff.
Yes.
And he's just there for the free meal afterwards.
Yes.
Which is fun, too, because, again, we've established that they have this... We quickly learn what the full dynamic is, because Hana mentions that she is wanting... She could potentially have a baby, because it's a Christmas miracle.
Yeah, she's real, like, a heavy believer in the Christmas miracle thing, too.
And she mentions to the... she asks for another serving, because she might be eating for two.
Yes, which... she knows is bullshit.
Yes, exactly. But I love her optimism, But that's the great thing about her, is she's so rooted in reality as well. She knows how things are.
She knows exactly how things are. And I like her version of being the optimistic character. Because arguably she is the optimistic one in the trio.
Yeah.
But at no point is she so optimistic that it's fake optimism. We see that a lot of, like, friendship will save me sort of.
Oh yeah, like
sort of thing.
Your husband in Black Clover.
Yeah, literally the whole plot of that thing is friendship will save us, and I am too stubborn to die.
Yeah,
and while Hana is too stubborn to die, there's not a point at any of this where, like, she faces something and you're like, no real human would be excited about this. Like, she's so real, but also, like, she knows she's not looking her best.
Yeah.
And I like also the detail they put into her straight from the get-go, is she's always got lipstick on. Mm-hmm. She's always got her hair did, even though she's full homeless mode.
Yeah.
But also, like, there's always a little bit of stubble, which is a really nice detail, especially for a drawn character, because that's something that you would normally just get out of a live action character. Yeah. And it's really hard to do that in a drawn sense without it being distracting. Yeah. And honestly, it's not. It just kind of becomes part of who she is. Mm-hmm. Same thing with Jin. There's bits on him that, like, he has the same scarf for most of the movie. There's no point where, like, he magically gets gloves and you're like, wait a second, I thought you didn't have gloves.
Yeah, there's no costume changes for any of these characters through the whole thing.
And, like, it's not even like they just don't have other clothes because they're homeless. Like, it becomes a plot point where they're like, you haven't showered or changed or washed in days, and other people are noticing. Exactly.
So one thing I do want to mention before going any further, is that most of the scenes you see in this movie are based off real locations. Yes. They scouted everything they shot, like from little parks to the next scene where the building pans up, or it cuts to a building of people walking across and pans up, and we're introduced to our third and final protagonist, Miyuki, who is on top of a building and spitting down on the denizens of Tokyo.
Like the true teenager she is.
Well, and I like this because it is defining her character again before she even has a word.
Oh yeah, you know exactly what kind of little brat she is.
Yeah, she's either doing this probably one out of boredom.
And very much so.
Two, it's just her attitude that she's taking her revenge on the people who currently have it better than she does.
Yes.
And like I mentioned about the detail of this movie, I absolutely love the amount of architectural detail that Nobutaka Ike, who was the lead animator, put into this, or the art director. The top of the roof that she's on, instead of just being like your generic roof, HVAC system, structural members, like
it really does help. Even if you're not a detail-oriented watcher like we are, it really helps solidify this as like this. The quality of this could have been shot in real life with no problem.
Well, and if I remember right, I think the movie originally started off as a potential live action, and then there was budget constraints, and then it got pushed off to an animated film.
And honestly, I'm not saying that it could have been done live action as like a gist. I think it more proves that like the level of
realism that Kon puts into all his work.
It really elevates this kind of above most anime movies.
Yeah. No, exactly. Instead of having like the generic
roof with the fencing around it.
Or the generic alleyways. They put the HVAC systems in there. They put wires. They put pipeways.
And also the details to trash, which is something that, like, this is going to sound weird, but one of my favorite hobbies is watching dumb TLC shows like Hoarders. And because it always fascinates me on, like, seeing how other people live, whether or not that's living much better than me in their fancy, like, designer homes, or someone who's not doing as well. Yeah. And the amount of detail, like, there's not just a trash bag in the alley. Like, they bother to show, like, different trash in all of the alleys. It's all in different places. It matches whatever building they're behind. Yep. It is so detailed.
Oh, yeah. And so, at this point, Gin and Hana arrive at the roof with the food.
Yeah, they're gonna have a meal.
Well, they brought the meal for Miyuki.
Yes.
And now we establish like the relationship between all three of them.
Mm-hmm.
Hana is lecturing Miyuki on how to be a woman.
Yes.
And is like, you can't slit with your legs open. She's being super motherly.
She is so motherly.
And Gin is just being the deadbeat kind of dad.
So deadbeat.
Yeah. But
it also, like, straight from the get-go, without even telling us true backstories on everyone, we also kind of know, like, this is starting point, and all three of them, we're going to be looking for development in each of these three different fields.
Oh, yeah. And we also established that they're kind of a redefinition of the nuclear human family.
Yes.
They've had to... And it's, like, for me, I have friends who are family.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
And it's kind of that similar situation where they've gone through an experience, they're living together, which there's more to it afterwards, but they've formed this odd hodgepodge of misfit family.
Yes, and it starts off and you kind of feel like, oh, I know where this is going, because especially with American movies, we see the whole concept of like, well, it's the misfit family, and then by the end, we kind of know where it's going, we kind of know how it's all gonna end. It's very much that Annie story of like, you just have to find your perfect family.
It's hard knock life.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I like this movie's acceptance of the stereotype at the beginning of the movie. Yeah. And then not letting that define it as we'll see as we go on.
Yeah. Again, they're not caricatures, they're characters.
They could have been pulled out of the street somewhere. Yeah.
And we do learn that this movie is still taking place on Christmas at the start. And even though they have little, Hana is still trying to make it.
She wants so bad for it to be Christmas.
Well, it is Christmas, but they're trying to celebrate it specially. She says she found a present for Miyuki and takes him to a trash heap where she says she saw a book of education or a set of children's education books.
Adorable.
Which
she's trying.
Pisses off Miyuki.
Yeah, because, she's the strong teen who don't need no adult.
Oh yeah, and she's being a brat at this point. She mentions that she's only homeless by choice, implying that the other two don't have a life if they don't have a chance choice, like she does. Yeah. And she says she can go anytime she chooses. Mm-hmm. We also learned that she's only been on the streets for 6 months.
Yes.
Gin is also being an asshole to her.
Yes, he is.
Which Miyuki proceeds to throw a book at his face, which starts a fight.
Yes.
And one thing to note as well, especially in everything in this movie, like I talked a little bit about how they layer things. Mm-hmm. The film has many comparisons and polarities.
Yes.
Of the opulence and the excessive goods and resources we have against the people who are destitute and stuff just being thrown out.
Yes. Yeah. There's a lot of dumpster diving and like not just coming up with like wrappers. Yes. They're, like full bags of food.
Yeah, and this is one such example where they're looking for books in a
dumpster. Yeah. And it is kind of interesting, especially because I think in America, like, we're starting to see that in more of the mainstream, because the idea of dumpster diving as, like, a sport, in a way, has kind of taken off in the last couple of years. We've seen it on reality TV shows. There's, a wave of people who, like, a movement, in a way, of people who think, like, this is terrible, we must do something, I will dumpster dive to prove my point, which I'm not saying that's wrong or right, I'm just saying, like, it's a dumpster. But, like, I think if this movie had potentially, like, hit audiences earlier than it did, I don't think that necessarily everyone would have bought into the whole... Because they pull, like, lots of stuff out of dumpsters throughout this whole movie. Yeah. Books, bags of food, bits of clothing, like, a whole baby, like...
Yeah, which,
and, like, watching it now, honestly, you don't blink at it, you're like, yeah... I'm sure there is dumpsters full of just fairly useful or, like, okay things. Yeah. And it's just not sellable. And so these people want it.
Yeah, or it's a day past its best by date.
Yeah, stuff like that. And so, like, I like that they don't, like... The dumpster is, like, never-ending treasure find for them. But it's never, like, really a thing in the movie. They just reach in dumpsters and they're like, yep, keep going. That's not the plot. Ignore the dumpster in the background.
Exactly. And so, while Gin and Miyuki are fighting, he grabs her tit.
Yes.
And asks her if this is what passes for a boob nowadays.
Rude, sir.
Which she's also mad at him because she's like, even my own father didn't hit me. He's like, well, maybe he should have, because he's the one giving the tough love.
Yes.
And at this point, Hana is getting mad at them and yells at them to stop, and we hear a baby crying.
Yes.
Abandoned amongst the trash with a note for whoever finds her to take care of her.
Yes, which... I like their reaction to finding the baby. And it's not just the initial reaction. This is the reaction that they repeat throughout the whole movie.
Yeah.
Is, who throws out a baby?
Oh, yeah.
So, like, it's not like oh no, what tragedy, we must do something, which is kind of Hannah's response. But, like, all three of them spend the whole movie trying to reconcile the fact that, like, someone would throw out an innocent life.
Yeah.
And it affects them in different ways.
And it becomes a tool for them to question themselves.
Yes.
And I'll go into that in a little bit as well. So, also at this point, we learned that Gin has been on the streets for about 30 years.
Yep.
And is beginning to feel sorrowful for the child because, he even mentions that even though he is homeless, his life is still better than some. And that this child was thrown out without even being given a chance.
Yeah.
As well, Miyuki finds a key in the swaddling, and Hana starts walking one direction, and Gin mentions that, hey, cop shop's that way. And Hana has decided to keep the child as it is a gift from God.
Yes. Hana is spiritual when she wants to be.
Yes.
And that's kind of a running theme throughout this movie, which I like, because it makes her much more, like, real. Like, everyone knows someone who is, when it suits them, so spiritual. And everything's a miracle or a sign or a blessing. And Hana fits it to a T, and then later on, it's not, like, the forefront of her character. It's just part of who she is.
Yeah, exactly.
And also, like, I like how Hana handles this as like it's not just a sign from God, but it's a sign from God to me that I am now finally to take my final form as the mother of this infant.
And it makes her feel whimsical in a realistic way.
Yes, and I also like that there's not a character shift immediately. We see the three different, like, what you would do's upon finding a child. There's the, well, we're going to the cops. Yeah. There's the, I don't know, what do you do with babies?
Yeah, exactly. She's a 16-year-old girl.
And as we find out, like, I think she's also the only child. Yeah. And then there's Hana, who has always wanted, like, the ideal nuclear family. Yeah. And this is her way in.
Yeah, and she's never really, she is an outlier of society to begin with. Yeah. And so, at the baffled looks of Miyuki and Gin, a truck pulls up with the title card painted on the side of the truck with the Tokyo Tower and Tokyo Godfathers. Yes. And I actually really like how they do the credits on this one. Yeah. Where they begin with, as they roll, they're on the billboards and the signs as the trio's walking through the city. Couple things of note. In the background, as they're walking by a convenience store, there are posters for Perfect Blue, Millennium Actress, and Tokyo Godfathers.
Hey, you gotta solicit wherever you can.
Yeah, and I like the way they even transition back into this. Because we begin to see how blessed is maybe the right word.
Yeah, like
because as they're walking, like how we're introduced back into their conversation is there's two men painting a billboard, and a can of paint falls right between Hana and Gin and Miyuki. Yes. And that's how we transition back into them, and they're trying to convince Hana to bring the child to the police station, as the child is better off not living on the streets. Yes. And we also get to see more of the Guardian Force, because as Hana is yelling at them, there is a traffic accident in the background where she would have been crossing the street. Yes. And as they're walking, Hana has made the mistake of anyone who finds an abandoned puppy, She has named her
Oh,
Kyoko.
yeah, she's named the baby.
Yes. And it begins the first of the Kyokos for Jin in the group.
Yes.
And I just love this part because she's just trying so hard to convince them.
Yes, and like all of her logic is very much like to herself, but she has to argue with these other two real people who are like, we all live here together. No. Mm-hmm. But all of her logic arguments are, she's trying very hard to make it sound less like it's for her and more like this is
for the baby's sake.
Yeah, like clearly they didn't want her. I want her. I will love her unconditionally.
I will love her and hold her and kiss her and call her George. But in this case, Kyoko.
Yes. And it's also interesting because like while she's always wanted a baby and she finally has one, it also becomes very clear that like she has no idea what she's actually doing.
Yep. Because
this poor baby has yet to stop screaming.
Yeah.
It is the background soundtrack to this movie is this baby's screams.
Yeah, well, and
but
okay.
That's accurate though. I have watched many a child.
Somewhat, but also I like that you brought up the music because the music for this one is quite whimsical.
The music for this is wonderful. The soundtrack's great.
It's not the standard glitchy pop that Satoshi Kon normally uses.
Yeah. No, I think he did a wonderful job of incorporating music that fit the movie, not his style.
Yes.
Because, yeah, you're right. His other movies, especially with their psychedelics, the music kind of helped lure you into the fluidity of his animation.
Yeah, especially like the parade in Paprika and all that.
Whereas this music, honestly, like, you could listen to this soundtrack by itself.
I mean, I listen to all the soundtracks, but...
Fair. But I feel with the psychedelic soundtracks, while you can listen to them by themselves, they feel more alive and finished when you have the visuals to go with them.
Yes, exactly.
Whereas this one, the soundtrack, it elaborates on the story and on the characters in a way, because the music's not taking itself too seriously. But at the same time, the music is playing like almost second fiddle to the background noises of the city and the background people and the baby chatters.
Yes.
And which works perfectly for this.
And that's another thing that they did is in creating these environments, they layered real city sounds to create the visual and sound for the cityscape.
Which works perfectly, because while I love a good soundtrack, like I will play it on repeat for days, the soundtrack to this one is second to the city noises, which helps elevate this from just being like the music says this is fun and whimsical, to Hana feels like this is fun and whimsical, but the city is telling me that this is not.
Yes.
Which is the perfect balance.
And we also learned that Hana is, versed at making haikus.
Yes, she is. She's quite the poet.
Yes, it's one of her first of like 4 or 5 haikus through the entire movie.
Yeah.
Question for you.
Yes.
I know how you feel about the hot springs in Ghost of Tsushima.
It's a lot of butt in that game.
How do you feel about the haikus in that?
I like the haikus, but honestly, I like the haikus that are pre-written, even the ones done by Hannah, which some of hers are, I would argue, very good, and some of them like feel like a child wrote them. Yeah,
it's like the joke one where they go like, something, refrigerator, piano.
Yes.
Yeah.
And like, but I kind of prefer that style, even the more jokey, not very serious ones better.
Yeah.
Mostly because it's her attempting to bring that arts and fantasy that is really like embedded in her into the rest of the world around her. And with Ghost of Tsushima, they all tie into the story or plot, but they feel forced as opposed to like Hana feels like she's just narrating what she's feeling.
Okay. Yeah, no, I completely agree with that. I feel that, again, this is a little off the rails. I've just been playing this game most of today as well.
And my husband has been binging it for like a month now.
Yeah, and I actually agree with that. Hers feel natural, again, adding to her whimsical and dreamer lifestyle.
She is such a dreamer. And I think the other reason why they work isn't just because, like, they're not just there to, like, prove that she is a dreamer, but almost to be like, she could have been an artist.
Yeah.
If that had been the path that she had tried.
Performer.
Yeah, but like a writer even.
Yeah.
Because she knows that some of her haikus aren't good. Like, you can see the smile or the little giggle that she gives to herself when, like, she gets through one and she's like, that was terrible.
Yeah.
Whereas, like, other characters, and, like, even in other movies, the haiku is almost like this, it's like a boring person trying to read literature, like high school literature style.
Yeah.
Whereas with Hana, it feels like poetry.
Yeah.
Like, it feels artsy and fartsy and, like, painting flowers on your bedroom wall, sort of.
Smelling your own farts, artsy fartsy.
Yes.
Yeah.
Like, this is the sort of person who, if she could, would have painted her room pink and, like, hand-drawn flowers because she was bored. Whereas the other ones, especially with haikus, because they're not something that's very ingrained in Western, like, literature.
Yeah, we have, like, a little section in, like, junior...
Yeah, like, you learn about them, but, like, no one sits around and is the artsy person for reading haikus.
Yeah.
There's always that one, like, emotional kid in high school who's like, I'm really into poetry.
Yeah.
And Hana's that person, and she makes that connection for the Western audience much better than I think a lot of other movies do.
Yeah, I agree with that. And so, after this, we get the title, or we get the director's truck pulls up, and we're cut to a shot we pan down from, or we tilt down from skyscrapers to trees obscuring the skyscrapers, to seeing it in the background, which all that obscures their little cardboard shack.
Yes.
Again, the amount of detail that they add to this, where we don't know what those buildings are. They could be apartments, they could be office buildings.
But honestly, like, they're skyscrapery buildings. Like, no one cares.
Exactly. And so, inside, Kyoko is crying, and the trio is arguing about what to do, as Hana is still desperately trying to convince them that they will take the baby to the cops in the morning.
She promises.
If they do so now, it will ruin Christmas.
She's like I said, this girl would have been like over-the-top gift giver, stockings for everyone, the cat's getting its own Christmas presents level person.
And Gin reluctantly gives in. Miyuki is still pissed. And she is sent out for milk. Not tap water, bottled water. Only the finest will do for Kyoko.
And this is the part where we finally get to see, like, what that meant. Because tap water, they probably have somewhere that, like, there's probably...
Like from a park fountain.
There's probably a park fountain, or, like, someone's hose isn't well guarded, and they just kind of, like, come and grab water whenever they need. They have to pay for bottled water.
Like the Manson family after they murdered Sharon Tate.
Yeah, sure. But at the same time, like, even the sales clerk kind of makes a mention of, like, she says something along the lines of, like, oh, you're actually buying stuff
or,
this time.
No, you're here for just water.
Just water?
She's like, yeah, which we learned she's not. She's gone to the dumpster, she's found some recently discarded food.
But you know what? She bought water.
Yep. And, at this point, we do begin to learn a little bit more about their relation. As Miyuki's running away through the alley, she runs into another pair of homeless men who refer to her as Gin's little princess.
Yes.
So we know that she's been taken in by Gin.
Yes.
And
we know that Gin's got a soft side.
Yeah. As the first redemption that he's been trying to do for himself, give himself some peace of mind. And also we begin to learn some of his tragic backstory, that he threw a bike race in order to afford his daughter's medical bills, but was caught, and shortly after he was kicked out of the league, his wife and daughter passed.
Yes. And we go into detail about this because his background story from his own mouth changes ever so slightly throughout the whole movie, which ends up being very important.
Exactly. And also about the little intricacies, because I started trying to pay attention to what they had in their background due to time constraints. I didn't have time to go back and, like, pick apart everything.
Fair.
But in the background behind Hana, there is a portrait. Propped up on, like, a makeshift altar of some kind.
Yeah.
And that is actually key to her backstory and the rest of the movie.
Yeah.
And so as we've learned, Miyuki comes in, they feed the baby, and night turns to day. Miyuki wakes up again because Hana has left with the child.
Run away.
And they find her in a courtyard, and we learn actually quite a bit more. Again, the layering of the story is great because...
And the pacing at this point, too. Like, this isn't like it doesn't feel rushed being told all this. You don't feel like you're being overloaded with backstory.
Oh, yeah. It just is slowly given to us and layered, which, again, makes a reference that there's probably an APB out for the kid, and there's maybe one for Miyuki as well, but Miyuki retorts back that if there's something out for, it's most likely an arrest warrant.
Yes.
And so we also learned that Hana was a foster child and doesn't want the baby to suffer like they did. Again, all of them trying to find redemption and taking care of the child.
Yeah.
Which, something to mention before, Miyuki, even though she's against the child, she saw that one of the homeless guys that she ran into had a book on childcare, and she leaves them a sandwich. Or
she pays them.
She pays them with an onigiri.
Yeah, like kind of a sandwich.
Yeah. Yeah. I've heard it referred to as the Japanese sandwich.
That jelly donut.
Oh, Pokemon. Oh, 4Kids.
Oh, the 90s were rough.
Americanization. That's what
Very
we'll call
much
it.
so.
And so another thing that we learned, well, also Hana didn't know her mother, so she's already connected with this child.
Yeah.
Another side note from the animators is that they had the hardest time trying to create realistic snow.
Yeah, really hard.
What they did was fantastic. They just layered the cells to make it look like actual snow, and it's fantastic.
Yeah, it's very convincing.
Yeah. And like I mentioned previously, they did similar effects with the sound of layering of everything.
Yeah, very much so.
Yeah.
Like an onion.
Yes, I was going to say like ogres, but yes, same thing. And now the mission has changed.
Yes.
Instead of getting the cops to the child, they are on a mission to find the parents.
Yeah, because they've convinced themselves that maybe if they meet the parents, then they can decide if the parents are worthy of the baby.
Yes, and it's a way for them to redeem themselves instead of pawning the problem off to a complete stranger.
Yes.
And so, it's a ridiculous attempt. Tokyo is a giant city.
It is, but at the same time, like, the way they present their logic, isn't completely out of left field. You tell them, Hobbs. It is your pillow.
I apologize. My cats are fighting in the background. More like Hobbs just hissed at him and walked 3 feet away.
That was terrible, Hobbs. But I like their logic process here too, because again, like, we're not making a leap that the audience is expected to follow, like a lot of, especially animated movies attempt to do. This is a logic that even the audience kind of feels like they thought up themselves. Like, well, if you're not going to go to the cops, you at least can try and find the parents. Yeah,
or like, I've kind of noticed this as a trend in some more recent mangas where they give you a little bit of detail for like one chapter where the chapter ends. Mm-hmm. And then the next chapter is explaining where this device even came from. And it's like...
Yeah. There's none of that in this one. Like, everything feels so fluid and natural that, like, you know in the back of your head that this is stupid and a bad idea. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, it's not that stupid, and, like, they can try for a few days, I guess.
It's endearing.
It is endearing. And, like, you've already connected with all 3 of these characters. Mm-hmm. Because even though Jin is an asshole, and... Miyuki is also kind of a dick. That's not their only personality.
No.
Like, Miyuki plays off that disgruntled teenage vibes so well that you're like, yeah, she's just confused and upset.
Yeah.
You know that Jin, he wants to try his best, but, like, he's tired of life.
Yes. And we can arguably say that Miyuki is the main character of this movie.
Yeah, at least the story follows her the most closely. And so you've reached kind of an agreement with all 3 of these characters where you know that they mean well. Mm-hmm. And so, like, what's the harm in trying?
Yes.
Which I like that logic jump so much better than, like, all right, time for the story. Leap.
I just thought of that stupid gif of, like, anime plot, and it's the busty chick jumping.
Yes.
Plot. And so they now proceed to a train station to find the locker that is attached to the key that Miyuki found in the swaddle of Kyoko.
Yeah.
And so in the locker, they find a bunch of personal belongings.
They just dump this locker into their bag.
Okay, so I like Miyuki at this part because she's picking up a pair of lingerie.
And she's like, this isn't going to keep anybody warm.
Exactly, which is definitely what I can imagine the thought of like a young teenage girl who's not fully aware of like the purpose of lingerie.
Or also like why someone would stash it in a train locker.
Yeah.
Yeah, like this is all still a joke, and like they've definitely written her up to this point as like she knows what's going on. She's not stupid, but also like the severity of this has not hit her.
She's very naive.
Very naive.
She is still a high school child.
Yeah, she's a high school child is the best way to put this.
Yes. Yeah. And so among the belongings, we find a set of hostess cards.
Yes.
For a girl, I think she goes by Midori is her hostess name.
I read it. I did not understand it, and I forgot it.
Yeah,
her name's not very important.
Exactly. Also, side little note that I liked. Mm-hmm. There is a bottle of Four Roses bourbon in the locker too.
Yes, there is.
I almost made a stew shot of Four Roses.
Fair. Fair.
But I will not. Four Roses actually does have quite an interesting history between America and Japan.
Okay.
But that is for another podcast and my other side interest of being in love with alcohol.
Welcome to the architecture world.
Yes. Yes. So at this part, they decide to go and try and find this hostess club that can be anywhere in Tokyo.
Real quick though, because it does come back up later, is they already start showing us also the photographs of the two people at this point. And it starts off feeling very like, oh, yeah, okay, there's a real person behind it. Isn't that cute? Mm-hmm. And it, honestly, the seconds it takes them to show us those photographs right now feels so insignificant. But the fact that they bother to do that later on plays such a huge impact in how you view the film that, like, applause.
Yeah.
So good.
It's nice little additions to it.
Yeah, because, like, even in action films, like, Western action films, there's a lot of like, where did you get that? Oh, I pulled it out of the locker. Didn't you notice? And it's like, no.
Yes.
Like, there's nothing that's like magically appears in this movie. Everything you know where they got it.
Yeah. And we also have a little bit of comedy dispersed into this scene.
The comedy in this one I love.
The woman at the soup line is coming down an escalator and sees Hana with the child and is kind of freaking out a little bit because maybe she was right.
Maybe she was right.
Yeah. And so they decide to board a train. And this is the part where we realize that they really are outliers of society.
Yeah.
And they're sitting on the train arguing while all the passengers are holding their nose and mouth. Yeah,
it's a slightly overdone visualization, but like it's necessary to really like help dictate like how the rest of society feels about them. So it makes it even more clear on why they wouldn't necessarily feel like other people or the police would have the best interests of three homeless people in their minds.
Yep. And so as the train stops due to buildup of snow on the lines, another train shows up, and across from them is someone who knows Miyuki. We don't know yet.
We don't know who.
It's an older man.
Yep. He sees her. He's calling somebody.
Yep. And as the passengers complain about the smell, Miyuki takes her cue and
leaps out the window.
Yep.
Thankfully, the train isn't moving and no one else is coming.
The other two follow, and they begin their trek through snow against posters of a happy couple on a ski trip.
Yeah.
As Hana begins to sing "The Hills Are Alive" with the sound of music.
And this cracks me up because we are so, like, at least Midwestern, if you had TV as a kid, The Sound of Music plays, like, twice a year. And it plays, like, all day, every day. So, like, even if you don't like the musical and don't, like, actively want to watch it, you have heard The Sound of Music.
Yeah.
Whereas, like, they make it pretty clear that, like, maybe The Sound of Music isn't as popular in Japan, which makes sense.
Well,
it's a very, like...
It also brings up that Hana is fairly well cultured. Yeah.
And, like, she likes art. Like, The Sound of Music, even for a musical, is a artsy musical. There's a lot of music in it, and it's all very well sung. It's very well shot. It's hella fucking long.
Fun fact, Edelweiss was made up for the movie.
It was, which, honestly, a fantastic song.
Yes.
And, like, the imagery that goes with the whole thing, like, you can't say that Sound of Music hasn't culturally impacted the world.
Again, and it's kind of a weird
and like
juxtaposition because we associate that movie mainly with spring and an Easter movie, and they're in the middle of winter.
But I think part of that is because ABC here, at least in the Midwest anyway, plays Sound of Music like nonstop at Easter. Like, it's kind of all that's on that and the movie The Ten Commandments, which, oh, it's so long.
I haven't seen that one.
It's terrible. It's so bad.
Someday.
We'll get to it. But like, yeah, and like, she's not just singing it, like, she loves this musical.
Oh, yeah.
And she's kind of bummed that no one else knows it. It's just so cute.
She is, and she's also not, because they have to take a break because...
She sang too much.
She sang too much, and she is being a drama queen.
Very much so.
And pretending like she can't go on.
She's so hungry.
The two will have to take care of Kyoko for her.
She's so hoot.
Yeah, I also kind of wonder if this is like a nod to like the cheesiness of the acting of like the original Three Godfathers.
I think it kind of is, and I think also like, I think Hana learned a lot of like the acting prowesses from older movies, where like, not just American movies, but like even older Japanese movies, like everything was over the top and dramatic.
Oh, yeah.
And like the amount of swooning and fainting and everything back then.
It's like when I tried showing my family Yojimbo.
Yeah, it's so over the top, but like it's kind of playing off of the old idea of stage productions.
Yeah.
And so like, as an artsy-fartsy theatrical person herself, of course she is going to have to pass away.
Exactly.
Faded like the flower she is.
Tragically. And so, from this vantage point, they see a cemetery.
Yeah.
And proceed to start taking offerings.
Which, I think this is the only part in the movie where a tiny bit of Japanese culture knowledge is useful.
Yes.
Not necessary, but it does help this scene make any form of sense.
Yes.
Because this is not a Western thing at all.
Because they're leaving people are leaving offerings of food and booze. It's
Christmas and New Year's time, so like this is a time for family remembrance. At least the New Year's part is. Christmas, not so much.
Yeah, I was talking with my parents about it because my brother Tanner has a girlfriend who I think is half Japanese.
Okay.
And they were talking to her about like Christmas traditions and stuff, and asking if they should order her KFC and
get her the strawberry cake.
I don't know.
This is all stuff that,
I forgot to ask people.
This is all the stuff that like we have learned like through movies and TV shows, and so like I love other countries and cultures' Christmas traditions, because even if it's not Christmas, there's something around winter.
Yeah,
and it helps to understand that like Christmas maybe not so much, but New Year's is typically something that's kind of a family-oriented event.
Yeah,
and so like. It's not you can make the leap with Western logic to go family event, go visit the cemetery to go visit dead grandma or mom or something.
Yeah.
And then that little last puzzle piece to know that like leaving practical real food or things at the cemetery for that deceased person to use is still something that may be a little old school, but like still done.
Yeah, it's tradition. It's like tradition. What was it? It comes from China. It's the straw dogs. Where I had to look this up because I watched the movie with Dustin Hoffman, Straw Dogs, to find the meaning behind it. And it's this concept of why do we burn straw dogs? It's not because we hate them or we love them. It's because we have to. Yeah. It's just something that's done.
Yeah. It's
tradition.
It's tradition.
Yeah.
And so like, that's the only like puzzle piece I think that for a Western audience member watching this film won't quite hit quite as heavy. Yeah. Like you'll understand like, okay, someone left offerings, it's a grave.
And them taking the food and drink is taboo.
Yeah. And like you'll get that, but I don't necessarily know if the weight, because this movie really likes to counterbalance the gravity of what they're doing and the situation they're in with the humor that the characters are presenting.
And also, like, what they have to do to survive.
Yeah.
Except besides Jin getting shit-faced, hence the sake.
Yeah.
And continuing to argue with Hana about...
this is their life.
Yeah, what are they gonna do? It's not like they can... Not like diapers or food's gonna or milk's magically gonna appear and,
Surprise, it does.
Again, a guardian force is watching over Kyoko.
They keep saying that.
They don't ever
Hana does.
They say it at parts, but it's not like explicitly stated by everyone.
Yes, but at the same time, like
they say the child's blessed.
They do say the child's blessed, which is adorable. But at the same time, as the movie runs, the blessings seem to continuously extend to, like, yes, it's definitely, like, for the child, but, like, you were close enough to help, like, be, like, rubbed up against that blessing.
Yep.
And since Hana's closest, Hana gets a lot of blessings in this movie.
Yeah, well, they all do, to an extent. And as they're going, and they're now stocked up and change, we learn that Gin is horrible with directions.
He is.
And luck.
He's got no luck.
Which ties in more into his backstory. And so they flip a coin and they take a path that leads them to a man who's stuck under a car.
Yeah. Poor guy, like, ran over himself on accident.
Well, so there's a little bit more to this. And the level of, like, little nods that he puts in. Once freed, the man explains that he heard a woman yell a dog's name, Dorothy. And something bumped into the car, and it rolled on top of him.
Because he forgot to put the handbrake on.
I saw this as Dorothy squishing the Wicked Witch of the West.
It definitely had the same vibe. Especially once you realize that this man is a mafia king.
Or Yakuza.
Yeah.
Yeah. So,
I like that they went with the more old school movie look for him.
Yeah.
He's a heavy-set man who's wearing a full tux. We learn later that's because it's his daughter's wedding, which, if you are familiar with the old school mafia, is like the standard trope of how dare you come to me on the day of my daughter's wedding.
Yeah, / he's also not there with his men, which he mentions he normally is.
Yeah.
But he was there to, at the grave, to pray to his dad.
Yeah.
To be, so that he wouldn't cry at the wedding because he doesn't like the son-in-law.
Yeah.
Or he likes him enough.
But he's not good enough for his princess.
Exactly, and whoever is. And so, at this part also, the man tries handing them a business card and money.
Yes.
But Gin wants nothing to do with it, and tells them, hey, let's leave.
Because at this point, while Gin is a loser, he's at least got street smarts.
Yeah,
he knows.
He's aware not to get involved with the Yakuza.
And, like, he knows this guy's name, and he knows that it's not just like, oh, this is just some dude.
Yeah, it turns out, Hana asks for if he knows this club. It's the son-in-law who is the club owner. And
surprise, wouldn't you know, he's going to go see the guy right now.
Yep.
You want to come along?
And so he takes the trio of them to the wedding.
They're all crammed in the back of the car. Is such a hoot.
We are taken to the second Kyoko, the bride-to-be.
The bride-to-be. And I think this scene does, mostly because this is one of the few scenes where we have a ton of people that aren't, like, crammed in a train or something. This is a really good example scene of, like, the effort put into the character designs for everyone, because no one is there's no stereotypical background forgettable looking person. The bride looks like they opened a high school yearbook and were like, that girl.
Yeah.
And, like, drew that girl. It's not like, oh, it's some girl with, like, she wears a t-shirt sometimes and, like, has hair.
Well, and that's one thing, like, with Satoshi Kon's characters that I find fascinating is, one, they look like just regular people.
They do.
And they don't tend, like, even the main characters are just slightly different, where they don't suffer from the main character syndrome, where it's like, oh.
Which one's the main character? Oh, the one with pink hair.
Yeah, exactly.
The other thing I really like about his work, too, and this is something that, like, I think this movie really exemplified. Granted, I haven't seen all of his movies. But, even just being somewhat familiar with them, is he's not afraid to make characters heavy set just because that's how they would be. Oh yeah, like
that's the thing. He's making real that
goes real
back to
people.
Yeah, it's him making real characters. Where a lot of his stuff could easily be translated to live actions, and some of them may have had influence. The directors say they did not have any influence by them.
But yeah, like, example here being the bride, while she is dressed up and she's got a beautiful dress and she's all dolled up, she has
a very round face.
She has a very round face. And it's not even like she's the fat anime character, because we've all seen that character.
Yeah.
No, she's just a round-faced girl.
Yeah.
Like, that's just the shape her head be.
Yep. And so, while the trio is at the wedding, real quick, I do like how Fate is kind of having to nudge Jin of like, here's your second Kyoko.
Go. Yeah.
There's a third Kyoko potentially.
Mm-hmm.
And so while they're there, Gin continues drinking.
Yep. Got the free alcohol at the wedding.
Miyuki is sent to change the diaper because it's his turn. And Hana and Gin are introduced to the son-in-law.
Yes, who happens to be apparently the guy who ripped Gin off at some point.
We're not 100% sure, because Gin is starting to get emotional and blames the guy.
Yes.
So this is the part where Gin's original story starts to crack a bit.
Yeah, because in his original story, there wasn't anyone setting him up.
Well, there was a guy who set him up, but Gin wasn't at fault.
Exactly.
And so once the son-in-law gives them directions to find Kyoko's mother, we find out that she quit being a hostess because she got pregnant.
Okay, fits in.
And
check.
We also learn that he drove Gin into debt.
And then I also like that, like, while without being too explicit, we are pretty quickly, like, confirmed that this son-in-law character is just kind of a dick. Yeah. And, like, mostly not because of any way he specifically is, but, like...
It's the stuff he says, where he says, don't go looking for her, she's not going to have anything for you.
Yeah, like, does she owe you money? Yeah. Like...
And
there's no gratitude, or even, like, this is my wedding day. Like, there's no emotion other than dickism presented, but it's all well masked.
And he also mentions that he got her into debt and that they made her pay with her body.
Yeah. And so, like, you quickly are like, all right, well, we know you're a scumbag and I've only met you for a few seconds. Yes. But it's not so in your face that, like, you're like, this character's fake feeling. He just feels like that douchebag.
He feels like an insensitive businessman.
He does. Yeah, that's it.
Yeah. And so, as Gin is actually filled with emotion at this point.
Yep, he's reached the limit.
He's about to hit the guy as an assassin disguised as a waitress.
As a waitress.
Goes to shoot the boss. And then
uses his future son-in-law.
The son-in-law jumps in the way because he's protecting the boss.
Yes, he is.
Yeah. And so,
But honestly, this does solve two different people's problems. Because the boss doesn't want this guy to marry his daughter. And as far as we know, I don't think the wedding's finished yet. This is like pre-wedding stuff.
Yeah, and that's the thing. I don't know how Japanese weddings are actually performed, if this one was going to be a traditional one. Well, they're not in kimono, so we can assume it's probably a westernized one. But again, I don't know their ceremonies. Or I
think there's a lot less don't see each other beforehand stigma. Okay. I think that is a very, like, western version.
Okay. And so, as the assassin tries to flee, he takes Miyuki and Kyoko hostage.
And immediately begins to speak Spanish, which I think is perfect for this.
Yep.
Because even if you were a purist who wanted to watch this in Japanese,
they don't translate it.
They don't translate it. So, like, unless you speak Spanish, this is just as, like, overwhelming and unexpected to you, the audience, as it is for the characters.
And I actually kind of appreciate that in films where the character's in a foreign country and they're not supposed to be understanding it, so you, the audience, is not given the context. Yeah. Unless, of course, you can speak the other language, then...
Yeah, then that kind of nullifies it. But, like, I do think this helps, too, because I think they knew going in that this movie would probably be well received in America. And so the normal anime trope is, they're speaking English. Yeah. I don't know what they're saying. And that kind of... It feels odd for an audience member unless it's like a full comedy style anime where you're like, it's standard English.
Yeah, or it's like whenever we watch something and it's what's the term? It's adapted to be more Japanese than English, where they add like a vowel or something at the end to actually give it the sound, like how it's supposed to sound.
Yeah. And so the fact that they chose to go with a Spanish speaker for this role helped, because even though like my husband and I speak enough Spanish that we weren't struggling to understand what this guy's saying, or later on his wife, it was enough of a shock for us to be like, oh,
yeah, because had you seen Tokyo Godfathers before we decided to do this?
I had seen it once.
Okay.
But it had been like a very long time ago, and I think I missed the first half of the movie.
Okay.
I think it was like, my friend had it. And it was one of those ones where she had already started it, and I was coming over, and it's like, all right, well, we'll finish this, and then we'll move on to Spirited Away.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
And that's another thing, too, is, like, Kon's work as I've gotten older has definitely become more of an influence on how I like my animation.
Sure.
That and, like, Akira, a lot of the older ones. Like, I've actually had talks with my brother on this. I just bring this up because you brought up Miyazaki's work. Mm-hmm. And I feel Miyazaki was a lot of our introductions to animated movies.
It definitely was a way for a lot of us, like, closet nerds to be like, see, other people like it too. It won awards.
Oh, yeah, exactly. That's, I think that's the first animated movie Christian and I watched. Or anime movie we watched, which Christian is a huge closet nerd, unless he's around me because he knows I don't give a shit.
Exactly.
But yeah, I don't know. It's interesting because as I've gotten older, I've become more interested in a diversity of films. And we can talk about this more at the end of the movie.
Sure.
Actually, I do want to talk about it because there's
a lot of differences with this work compared to what I think a lot of people are used to seeing.
Exactly. And so, as Miyuki is taken hostage,
yes,
they're all trying to figure out what to do.
Everyone's panicking, but also in their own special ways.
Yeah, and at this point, as I was typing out this breakdown of what happens next, it feels rather sporadic when you talk about it. But watching it, it has a very nice flow to it.
It does have a nice flow, but I also like that, like you're saying, from a written standpoint, it's very
jumpy.
It feels chaotic.
Yeah.
Which helps a lot because it
is chaotic.
It is chaotic. There's no one quite knows what's going on. You're confused as to what this guy's intentions are. And that helps really like steer you towards the feelings that the characters are trying to have. Because
instead of following immediately with Miyuki and Kyoko being taken hostage, which I love that part because he's speaking to her and she's like, just gives him a smile. A very characterized smile.
Yes.
Which Satoshi Kon in this film specifically does a very fine line of realism against caricature.
And the caricatures in this one are they're always used for a purpose as opposed to a gag.
Yeah.
Which helps a lot because then it almost feels like an emotion that normally you wouldn't be able to get across.
Yeah.
Whereas a caricature of the feeling of is hard to just draw on a standard face.
Yeah.
Because that could be accidentally mistaken for just pure terror.
Yeah.
And that wouldn't have fit her character at all. Because while she is absolutely terrified, she's also a ballsy kid.
Yeah. No. And so, at this point, we cut back to Gin and Hana at a phone booth. Mm-hmm. Gin wants to call the cops, and Hana wants to chase them down by calling a taxi. A taxi that picked up the other trio.
She wrote down the taxi number.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so, they end up splitting ways because everything's fractured at this point.
Yes.
The
breaking point, if you will.
Yeah, the kid keeping them together is now gone.
Yeah.
Gin, still drunk, stumbles upon an old timer who has collapsed in the street.
Poor old dude.
And I like this part because it reminds me of a little bit of like a nod to A Christmas Carol.
It is very Christmas Carol-y, like the ghost of future Christmases.
Yeah, where the old man is supposed to be Gin in the future.
But also, like, I appreciate that the connection there is very, like, easy to make. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, this old guy doesn't feel like a shadow of what is to come. So much as just like, you found another old dude.
Yeah.
Do you want to be that stereotypical dude?
Well, it plays more into it a little bit later.
Yeah, for sure.
And so we're cut back to Miyuki, who is brought to a slum apartment where she steps on a used discarded needle.
Scares the Jeezers out of her.
And she's starting to freak out because she thinks she's going to be sold into sex trafficking.
Very scary.
Again, she's with an even further outlier of society. Yeah, she might be homeless, but she's Japanese.
Yeah.
This guy's Spanish.
Yeah. So she really has no idea what's going on or what to expect.
Yes. And so now we cut again back to Gin, who is taking care of the old timer.
Because Gin can't do anything but care for people.
Yes, exactly. He's a softie at heart.
He is such a softie.
He gives tough love, but the guy, he's asking for one more request. And he
just a swig.
Just a real long drag.
Gotta wet the whistle.
Yeah. And so, I just like how the intricacies of Kon's movie works.
Yes.
Because, one, he has, what's that one dog, Coco?
Yes.
The old man has Coco eyes where they're going...
They are the little Coco-y.
Steve Buscemi from Waterboy.
Yeah, where it's the opposite of being cross-eyed.
Yeah. And so, Gin thinks the old man has died.
He's dead.
He closes his eyes.
Old man's not dead.
Still awake. And wishes for one more.
One more sip. But there's also a nice extra level of detail here, where this old man is also homeless. He's also a drunkard, but instead of his shack being almost a reminiscent of a house, like Jin and Hana's shack was, where they had a bedroom of sorts. They had made themselves a bed. They had made themselves a
space
kitchen.
for Miyuki.
Yeah, like they had a quote unquote living area.
Hana has a shrine of some kind.
They've got pictures and magazines. They found a calendar to hang up. Like it's as close to a house as they can make it. This man is just living by himself in trash.
Yeah.
Like, there's no room for anyone else.
Because Gin has been referring to himself as trash this time. Well, Hana calls him trash.
But then he starts...
Hana.
Yeah, but he, like, you can tell that he's starting to believe that he is trash.
Yeah. And that's what I like about this is... God, just the level of detail in these movies. Like, I could watch this one over and over and find little stuff.
Oh, for sure.
Because, and that's the other thing, too, is as Gin's leaving once the old timer has actually passed, he tells him, get some rest. He's been given some item that he doesn't want the old man doesn't want his family finding. The old man wants to be forgotten.
Yeah, he just wants to go away.
Gin finds a poster of the towers in the picture behind the couple from the locker. Again, the little details add to everything.
But also, it's a nice level of detail because kind of like those detective stories where like, oh, this thing from the very beginning of the movie finally plays back around. And unlike those where like some detective runs off and is like, Eureka, I've discovered it, and then tells you later, you get to see the like, oh, I've seen that before.
Yep.
And like, you get to fully see that thought process, which really does kind of help lend itself to the believability of this completely ridiculous story.
Oh, yeah. And also, as Gin's leaving, there's a group of street punks that show up ready to ring in the new year by taking out the trash. Yeah,
and like, it kind of almost feels like a bunch of like, this is a dumb idea that they've taken too far, and now that there's 5 of them, none of them can back down.
Yep.
So, one of them wants to pretend to karate kill a guy, one of them wants to beat someone with a stick, and the other one really... Like, he's there, he doesn't care, but, like, also, we could be at a party, guys.
Yeah. Well, that's a little bit later, but I see this as the fates testing Gin.
Very much so.
And so, after this, again, we cut back to Kyoko, who's being breastfed by the Spanish woman who's also feeding her own child, as she and Miyuki, who we now know is actually safe.
Yeah.
They're trying to communicate.
As best they can.
Exactly. And they communicate by their... dad, who are policemen.
Yeah, they managed to both know the word policeman and dad.
Yeah.
And they both still have photos on them.
Yes.
She still has photos of...
Well, that's a little bit later, because she says, oh, my dad's a policeman. And then we cut back to Gin, who one of the punks is imitating Bruce Lee with a...
He is doing a terrible job and falls on his face.
Yes. And they begin to beat the ever-loving shit out of Gin. And proceed to... pull out the old man, the nameless old man. Yeah. And trying off him who's already dead.
Yeah, he did.
This is where we see another thing of the fates come in. Yeah. Where as they're very close to killing Gin.
Yeah, they really do.
They get a phone call. And there's a party where supposedly some hottie's going to be.
There's going to be some girl there. Don't you want to come see the girl?
Yeah, and her friends are going to be there.
Oh, boy.
And so they leave him, and a nice little bit of trivia from the directors.
Mm-hmm.
The building light in the background goes off as they're beating Gin,
mm-hmm.
and as he starts getting up, the light goes back up like a health bar.
Aw,
yeah,
adorable.
like in three
bits.
Yeah,
cute.
It's a nice little nod. And so now we cut to Hana, and what has she been doing this whole time?
What hasn't she been doing?
She has commandeered the taxi driver.
She has swindled her way into the taxi.
And is badgering him while he just wants to go home. He's at the end of his shift.
This poor guy, he gets roped into helping her, and then continues to be roped into helping her because she keeps telling him, like, you're a terrible person for not helping me.
Yeah. And so at this part as well, now again, like I said, this is extremely, describing it feels chaotic because we're now cut back to Miyuki, who's going over the photos with her, the Spanish woman, and
we're finally starting to understand her a little bit better.
Because she shows a picture of herself first, and this is what I love about Kon's work, is Miyuki, before she went homeless, and we don't know because she's wearing bulky clothing, she is an overweight woman.
Yeah, she's chubby. She's a chubby kid.
Yeah.
But, like, even with the bulky clothes on, you can tell that, like, she has definitely lost weight.
Yes.
Being homeless, yeah.
And it just made me think of, there's this manga about this overweight chick who, character dies and she just loses a lot of weight over the weekend.
Yeah.
That was really cute. I can't remember its name.
Me neither. It was adorable, though.
And so we also see that she has a cat.
Yes.
That was named Angel because of its cute wing pattern on its back.
A very cute cat who she is very attached to.
And we also learned that she can't go home, even though she's bragged about it. We learned that she stabbed her dad. She did. But we don't know why yet.
Yeah.
And so at this point, we actually get a glimpse of Kon's other work, where Miyuki is asleep. And she begins to have this dream of when she when she stabbed her dad. Yeah. Because Angel went missing and she's blaming her dad. We also learned that her mom's religious.
Overly so.
And that she thinks that her dad didn't like the cat.
And he, like, threw it out. And also...
And no one listens to her.
And it's also becoming very, very clear that, like... And you're never told what actually happens from an outsider's point of view. But it's also made very clear that, like, she doesn't feel like anyone in the house loves her. Yeah. She feels very alone, and, like, the cat was kind of her only friend sort of situation.
Yeah, and that's the other thing I like about this part, too, is that Miyuki, again, like we talked about Kon, is he creates realistic characters. Yes. Minus specifically one character he's more of a character in Paprika, but the heavy-set tech guy. Yeah. But we've also known guys like that. Yeah. But not to that extreme. But anywho, so we're again cut back to Hana, who has been dropped off outside the alley, where we learn that Hana is not in the best health.
No, Hana's not feeling too good.
And she stops and coughs, and as she's running away, blood trickles down the pipes. Yeah. Again, the architectural detail in this movie.
Very delightfully detailed.
It is amazing. And now we actually enter the dream sequence, where the home where we see the stabbing happen transforms into the cardboard home of Hana and Gin. Yeah. Where her father is transformed into Gin, who is asking for booze. Yes. And Hana is like her mother. Yeah. But her faith is based around Kyoko.
Yes. And it's a weird parallel because, especially with the lighting and coloring that this scene does, you can tell that while the similarities and parallels are there and are becoming really obvious to Miyuki, she clearly thinks of her home with Hana and Jin as a happier one than the one she left. The colors are warmer and brighter. The characters have more of a smile on their face, even when she thinks they're doing something she doesn't approve of.
Well, and at the same time, it's also not as inviting as well. Yeah, because it is ramshackled and
definitely. But it's one of those like slight differences in the way things are drawn and how the characters are specifically interacting with her, as opposed to how she viewed her mother and her father as like being kind of separated and in their own worlds, sort of. That it kind of, it leads you towards the same thought path that she's having, where she is better off homeless. She thinks this is a better family for her than the one she had. But
she's also realizing that she's replaced her issues with...
new issues,
Exactly. And also, in the dream, Kyoko sprouts wings!
Yeah.
Like Angel the cat.
Like Angel the cat.
And I had an interesting thought at this point. How, in movies, babies are almost treated like objects. Kind of like how pets are treated in movies at times, too. Where they don't really have a character, they're just... there and almost like an object or a set piece.
Yeah, and the only times it feels like, especially for pet purposes, the only time it ever feels like an actual character that, like, especially for a Western pet owner that we're used to thinking of, is like if it is a pet-centric movie.
Yeah.
And often then the pet is given almost too much personification.
Yeah.
Especially like Lassie, Homeward Bound 2.
Yeah.
The second one was not necessary.
Well, one thing I will say, the clear distinction for me in the movies I watch, if there's a focus on the child's going to live. If there's too much emphasis on the pet pet is going to die.
Yeah.
There has been so many movies I've watched where it's like, you guys, like, the guy's like feeding the dog and it's like, there's a little bit too much focus on this dog.
The dog
is going to die.
Yeah. Which is something that I think a lot of people have also noticed. It's definitely something that's so far noticed to the
There's
point...
a website about does the dog die?
And it just tells you yes or no.
Yes.
And it's clearly to a point where people no longer have the same connection, I think, with pets in movies. And so I do wonder if, like, the writing, anyway, will change in the future for both babies and for dogs. Because, babies are often written either as complete burdens that no one really likes, or they are...
baby genius.
Yeah, they're a baby genius. They're an object that just, oh, I can't stay. I have to go home and take care of the baby.
Or they're the center of the plot, like 3 Men and a Baby.
Exactly.
Rosemary's Baby.
But even those babies are...
They live,
but also, like, they are not, like, they are an object still throughout the movie, as opposed to, like...
baby geniuses or boss baby.
Where it is a hard line to walk, because, especially for infants, there's not a whole lot of character development you can do with a baby.
Exactly.
Same thing with dogs or cats, if you're going to be, like, for a realistic sense.
Yeah, but which is why I just find it fascinating, like, their depiction in movies.
I do too, and I kind of like how Tokyo Godfathers bothers to... while we only see Angel for literally a couple seconds throughout this entire movie, it's made very clear that Angel is a cat. He's very sweet. She loves this cat more than life itself. Yeah. And that's really all we need to know. And because of that, I am less invested on whether or not Angel lives or dies, because I am not invested in Angel. Yeah. All I need to know is that she is.
Yes, exactly.
And kind of the same thing with the baby. Like, the baby feels like a real baby, because it's never, like conveniently missing when, like, the adults need to do adult things. It's still there doing baby things. Yeah. And it exists. It's still existing, but at the same time, like, no one is being like, oh god, the baby. Yeah. Like, it's a very natural feeling movie, and I am interested to see if, especially going forward, because I think animation does this better than live action movies does in general. I'm interested to see if that starts to pick up.
I know I just thought of one movie where the baby dies.
Okay, which one?
Trainspotting.
Okay, yeah.
Where there is a focus on the baby, and the baby dies. The baby does
die, yeah. I mean, there's plenty of ones where the baby dies, but, like, I think in general, animated movies tend to do a better job of letting pets be pets and babies be real babies that have to be dealt with. Yep. And loved and cared for, and also, like, exist in your plot. Yep. And I'm interested to see if, especially since we've been seeing so many tropes from the animated world come over into the live action world. Oh yeah. Yeah, I'm interested to see if that writing trope comes over too. It might make some action movies stronger.
Yeah, I'm curious too. Yeah. So, at this point, Hana finds Miyuki because she's just running down the alley screaming their names.
Finally opens a window, is like, what do you want?
Yeah, and they're reunited. They're back on their journey. Hana is there wishing Gin was dead, and we cut to Gin dying in an alley.
Yeah.
Where we also are given a little bit more information that isn't really led on to begin with, where Miyuki mentions that Hana is actually in love with Jin.
Yeah.
Which
it's a subtle adult style like love, I think. Which I like. I like that better than like the teenage girl version of love.
Yeah, which there was something I saw that Miyazaki had said about how he doesn't necessarily, he's gotten tired with the trope that because a girl and a boy meet, that they have to fall in love.
Yeah. I think a lot of people are done with that trope.
Which I actually quite liked with Enter the Spider-Verse, where at the end where he's with Spider-Gwen, and there's like that moment where like, oh, they're gonna kiss, and then he stops and like, friends. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, exactly.
And I think this movie does a good job of being like, it is possible for two adults, one of whom can love the other one, and nothing comes of it.
Yeah, exactly.
They can still live together and be friends all they want.
Yeah. And so, as they're walking, an ambulance rolls by, and the medics say a homeless man was found dead in a park. And
Hana shows her true colors.
Because she's afraid it's Gin.
And she bawls her poor little eyes out.
And it turns out to be the nameless old-timer.
Yes.
Which... he honestly is kind of a tragic character. Which
he is, because in the end, even though Jin was there, he still died alone like trash. And because Jin, accepted his last wish, there's a strong possibility that his family won't know.
Yep. And so, as Gin is lying in the alley, again, we cut back. Again, this is sporadic.
This man's having a rough day.
He is lying in an alley, and an angel appears before him and asks, what does he need? An ambulance? Or I forget the other thing she asked.
Her magical love, or some bullshit like that.
Yeah, her magical love. And Gin says, an ambulance. And then the light behind her fades, and she stomps, and...
She's just mad because he didn't pick her.
Yes. And so, Hana and Miyuki...
finally cave, and...
they're trying to figure out what to do, and Hana breaks and says there's one place they can go, because they don't have a place to stay for the night.
Yeah, and it's real cold.
It's, so they head to the Angel Tower Club, where, as the door opens, we're told that it's a private event, but...
We're closed.
It's Hana.
It's Hana. So it's not a private event.
It's family.
It's family.
And as they open the door, there's Gin!
Almost... scraping by.
Yes.
Fully bandaged and on a couch.
Yes, and now we learn about Hana's past.
Yeah.
Well, we also learned that the person who brought Gin was most likely a drag queen.
Yes. In a delightful angel costume.
Yeah, off to a holiday costume party. We don't do Christmas costume parties normally.
We don't. This is...
that'd be fun.
This is part of the, it doesn't matter too much to the story, but it is a nice little tidbit to understand that, in Japan, Christmas is more of a couples event.
Yes.
It's like a young people's Valentine's Day. You should go out partying with your significant other, maybe a kiss under the mistletoe. Mm-hmm. It's not a family thing. Yeah. Yeah. Which... It's a party day.
Yeah, it's interesting. And I know we talked about this when we were originally thinking we would be able to travel for the holidays, where I learned from my parents that when my dad was in the military, Christmas was a family holiday, and so the young single airmen covered their shifts, but New Year's was for the young couples.
Yeah, so you trade.
Yeah, exactly. And so we learn Hana's backstory. Yes. Hana was a drag queen at this bar. Yep. And her and Mother, who we find the woman who opened the door.
In her bathrobe and hair curlers.
Yeah, well...
Or shower cap?
No, she wasn't like that yet. That's when they're leaving.
Oh, right.
Yeah, and so they're reminiscing over the past. As
good
well,
old days.
We learned that Hana left the bar because she...
she punched a client in the face.
Yeah. To be fair, the client was being a dickhead.
Oh, he was being an absolute rude person, but you can't punch clients in the face no matter how badly you want to.
Yeah, and we learned that...
but also...
Hana's homeless somewhat by choice because the true love of her life has died.
Yeah.
And they're thinking, okay, is it potentially AIDS? And we know he had a humdrum, boring death. He fell in a bar of soap.
No, he slipped in the bathroom and died.
Yeah.
Which is very sad.
Which cut back to the photo in the hut.
Yeah.
Because she pulls that out and...
Yeah.
That was her husband.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we also we're never directly told that Hana gets fired from the club. It's kind of implied that, like, maybe she left because she felt really bad about this.
Yeah, and also Hana's a drama queen, as we've
so
seen by, I've hit a customer, I can't leave.
I can't possibly show my face around here again. They would hate me. And
exactly.
No one hated her. They all were so happy she was okay.
Exactly. And so, they rest for the night. Gin wakes up in the middle of the night and... what's camisole?
A full frilly dress.
Yeah, something like that. Well, Hana's making laundry or doing laundry and finds the folded pocket or the photo and the poster in Gin's pocket.
Yeah.
And says, I love you, Gin.
Yeah.
So now that they're, so for me, as the trio takes off, as much as I love how all these stories wrap up, because they do.
Yeah.
Hana's, for me, feels the quickest done.
Yeah.
Hers isn't as deep. Again, which I think fits her character because she's such a whimsical character.
Yes.
She's too worked up over stupid little shit.
And I think, honestly, having a character who is easily worked up over something that it's not a big deal. Like, this is the end of her character development.
Mm-hmm.
It helps balance out the other two characters much better.
Yeah.
Because if Hana's dilemma was this character development at the same scale and pacing as the other two, we would have had 3 story plots to have to wrap up all at the same time.
Exactly.
And honestly, the fact that they left the other two to finish wrapping up their own ordeals at the end was plenty.
Yeah.
It was enough to try and balance the emotions of those two characters at the end on top of Hana's problems and sadness. Yeah,
true. And so, as they take off, they're left with a Christmas note.
Yes.
Money that's been given to them by Mother, and Mother's told them that
you always come back.
Yeah, that at least Hana's always welcome.
I think, and it's made pretty clear that Mother, while she's a tough old bird, if Hana had been like, oh, I really need this child to stay, someone would have found some way for them to have stayed somewhere.
Exactly. And I think her giving her money is...
It's the ultimate, you are truly, it's okay.
Yeah. And it doesn't feel like the money's given with an expectation to pay back.
No. It's very much like you said, she's only ever... I think she's only referred to as Mother.
Yeah.
And it's never like a title. It's like, no, Mom.
Yeah.
It's Mom.
It's like how in theater in high school, my mom, who did a lot of the stage design and acted and did a lot of work, a lot of people called her Mom. Mm-hmm. So it's that similar feeling.
Yeah.
And so now the trio go to a diner. They have a nice meal, and there's a montage of time passing around them.
Yeah.
So, which now we're probably getting closer to New Year's Day.
Probably. Yeah.
Or New Year's Eve. And so after the meal, they are still searching. Mm-hmm. They find refuge in a dilapidated building full of cats.
Yep. It's very full of cats.
Gin mentions, I wonder what cat, have you ever thought about eating cat?
And then we see the true form of the girl. She is a cat goddess.
Miyuki.
Her and all the cats are very upset by this idea.
Touch them and I'll murder you 1,000 times over. And so we also find, because Miyuki again is sent out as an errand child, to go get sake for Gin. And she says, I'm only going to get one.
Just the one.
But as she's leaving, she takes a look back. The dilapidated house is the house they've been searching for.
Yep, that's the one. And then wouldn't you know it, the nice neighbor lady happens to remember something about them.
Yeah. In the morning, they're talking to a trio about the baby's parents. We learned that they were not good people.
No, they weren't.
The wife was an abuser. The husband was a gambling addict.
And maybe a deadbeat.
And while the local mother...
The Gossip Squad.
The Gossip Squad is talking, which, by the way, this part actually reminds me of an episode in Paranoia Agent.
Yes, okay.
With the domestic housewife sharing rumors.
Yeah, it's very rumor mill.
They're rummaging through what's left.
Yeah, trying to see if they can find anything.
There's a VHS labeled Star Wars Episode 4.
A delight. And it's very much a homemade, I stole this off the TV.
Yeah. And we also learned that the house was built by Midoriya's mom and dad, which they ran it to the ground.
Yeah, they didn't take care of this house whatsoever. But
also Miyuki finds a little note in a newspaper that Angel came home.
Angel's home, please come back.
Yes.
Yeah.
Or not even just come back, just Angel came home.
Yeah.
Yeah, which is super sweet. And we learned she could have come home the whole time.
But it's definitely one of those cases of, like, in her teenage head.
Yeah.
What level of severity does she think everything is at?
Because she wasn't reading newspapers. She wasn't interested in any of that. She's too wrapped up in her own head. And
this is, I think, the first start of her peeling back her world to see what everyone else is, like, truly experiencing and feeling, as opposed to looking at everything through her own filter.
Yep. And now that the trio has no clue where to go, they're sitting waiting in a convenience store where Miyuki goes to make a phone call. And Hana and Gin are sitting there, and they're talking about children and that parents Hana mentions that a child never forgets her parents.
No.
And then Gin mentions that a parent never forgets the child.
Yeah.
Which his story further slips up a little bit, and they're interrupted by some asshole. Well,
just drunken dude.
Yeah, before this, we're at the phone booth with Miyuki, and she's on the phone. She calls her dad, but she can't say anything.
She's too nervous.
She's embarrassed by...
Definitely. There's a lot of emotions.
She's dealing with her hubris that she's been the idiot the whole time.
Yeah.
And so, Gin's story is interrupted by a drunkard who, if you would recognize before, was the asshole that Hana smashed in the face.
Yeah, this dumbass has had a hard time.
Yeah, no, I remember why she hit him. He insulted her. Yeah, he called her like an old bird or something.
And like while she was trying to sing and perform. So he's like not just being rude to her, but he's like hassling her off stage.
To be fair,
she was doing terrible.
She tossed her glass of wine on him.
She did accidentally toss her glass of wine on him, and it was arguably not in the correct key for her.
No, not at all.
It's not her song, but that's okay.
Despite having the desire to be a woman, she is a baritone.
She is a baritone, and on top of that, some of the songs, because she sings quite a bit in this movie.
Yeah.
Some of the songs you can tell that she's practiced a lot, she knows how to act them, and then that song very much felt like a fresh piece that she just didn't quite know what to do with yet.
Yeah.
It wasn't a full gig, and he hassled her right off stage, and she was mad and embarrassed.
It was a young Hana, or younger Hana.
A younger Hana.
Yeah. And so, as they're asked to leave the convenience store because someone else might want to sit there.
And no one else has been in this place this entire time.
Nope. They proceed to leave the store. They're like, fine, whatever, we're not meant to be here.
We don't want to be here either.
And they're still getting harassed on their way out.
Oh, yeah.
And as they're out, a truck drives into the storefront. Yeah. Again,
barely missing them.
The child is blessed. There is something looking out for them.
Oh, for sure.
And so... Hana and Gin decide to, where was I at? Sorry, I lost my thought on my notes. Okay. So, at this point, Hana passes out.
Mm-hmm.
And the gang goes to a hospital where the doctor seems to only care about getting them out the door.
This is kind of a rude-ass doctor, to be very frank.
But, again, to defend the doctor a little bit, as he says, his job is just to treat them while they're there. He can't change their lifestyles.
That's true, but also, like, it's been made very clear that, like, something is very wrong with Hana.
Yeah.
Like, it's not like, oh, she has the sniffly cold, tee-hee, boo-hoo. Like, Hana's life is probably in danger.
Yes.
And the doctor says, your friend is sick. She should lay down for a bit.
Yep. And...
that's not gonna fix anything.
Yeah. Well... And while they're waiting, Miyuki's in the waiting room with Kyoko.
Yep.
And a nurse says, "Oh, that's a cute baby."
How old is it?
I don't know.
This baby.
It's a baby. And we also learn that that nurse's name is Kyoko.
Yeah, another one.
And as they're checking out, Hana, we learned that Gin was saving up money. We learned that Gin's kid is still alive, and Gin was saving up money for them.
Yes.
And proceeds to pay for Hana's medical bills.
With that money.
And while they're getting their receipt,
it's his daughter!
Kyoko the nurse passes by. And this is where fate finally reunites Gin with his true Kyoko.
Yeah, his daughter. Who is now an adult.
Gin continues to lie about his life.
Lie right through his teeth.
And we learn that Gin was actually a deadbeat.
Yeah.
He worked at a bike shop. He was the gambler.
Yeah.
And he left because he couldn't afford the bills that he racked up.
And so it's revealed that, his daughter and his wife tried really hard to keep the shop afloat, but they didn't really know anything about bikes. And so...
Well, it seems like they did know about bikes, but it just was too much for one person to handle.
Yeah. And so... they had to get rid of his shop, which it kind of makes it sound at some points where, like, maybe when he started, it was his passion, and he wanted to be the bike shop owner. And then as time went on, he just...
became a deadbeat.
Yeah, just kind of fell down the hill.
Which I think the one part of Gin's story that holds a little bit of truth in the beginning... Like, all his stuff has, like, the inkling of truth.
Oh, yeah.
Because he does mention when he was 20, he got a girl pregnant.
Yes.
So we know he's probably in his 60s right now.
Yeah.
But we also learned that, when he said he was a bike racer, he owned a bike shop.
Yeah, he's not a semi-famous racer.
He's twisted the truth to make him seem like he's the good guy.
Yes. And the only part of his story that truly holds water the whole way through is how much he loved his wife and daughter.
Mm-hmm. And he saw him leaving as his way to save them.
Yeah.
But it didn't.
Yeah, no.
Because it's kind of assumed that Gin's wife is dead.
Yeah.
And we know that his Kyoko is now marrying the doctor.
Yeah, the asshole one.
Who actually turns out to be a relatively sweet guy who has a similar situation to Gin.
Yes.
Kyoko has a father complex.
Yes.
and so, at this point...
Poor Hana.
Hana...
is like, you are full of shit.
Flips shit at him, reveals everything, and I love this part to it. That
I do too, because...
she reveals he's homeless and useless, because
she's telling his daughter all this.
Yeah, and Gin, like, I love this part of the animation too, because at parts, Hana's face seems very much like a kabuki mask.
Oh yeah.
And it's just that play between caricature and
realism.
Which is actually what I think great too, because, we learn that Hana is playing the role of the bad guy.
Yes.
And she explains the story of the red and blue Oni.
And like, I like this too because this is like a two-sided sword for Hana. Hana clearly has always appreciated honesty and goodness in the world.
Yeah. And
so it's making her so mad that he would lie to his own daughter, who he has spent all this time looking for.
Yeah.
And then on top of that, being the artsy-fartsy drama person that she is, she's fallen in love with this story about the red and blue devil, and one has to play the good guy and the other the bad guy so that the other one can find friends and happiness, but that means the other one must go off and be gone forever.
Yep. And
of course, she has projected that onto herself.
Yep. And we now begin towards the climax of the movie.
Yes.
2 of their stories are finished.
Yep.
We're still waiting on Kyoko and Miyuki.
Yep. The daughter hands him a phone card and is like, "You can call me."
Yeah. Just
say hi sometimes. Yeah. We're happy you're not dead.
Which now Gin and Hana's story are wrapped up.
Yeah, they're effectively done.
Yep. Which starts bringing optimism to the film.
Yeah, you're starting to feel really good about this.
Yeah, and as Hana and Miyuki cross a bridge, Hana also says a New Year's
tradition of taking your shoes off before jumping.
Or a haiku and stuff.
Yeah, and it's very artsy.
In the background, a woman is about to jump who leaves her shoes. Which we learned from our Titanic episode that is common for suicide victims to leave something behind.
Yes. And it's also played really nicely because it's again that humor balance that this movie does so great with, where you see this person as they're talking about that tradition of leaving something behind when you're going to die.
Yeah.
And they walk fully past her while they're talking about this horrible thing while you are witnessing, being like, ah!
Yeah, yeah.
And it's a really nice tension where, yes, this is a horrible thing, but because this humor is happening on top of it, you aren't led to this, like, sense of dread.
It reminds me of scenes in horror films.
Yes.
Where, like, there's that little something happening in the background where the characters are almost oblivious to it until the last minute.
Yes.
But they are lucky enough to save her.
They save her, and they realize it's the girl in the photo they've been looking for.
It's Midori.
They've been looking for this lady all over Tokyo.
The mom's happy to be reunited, but Hana freaks out and slaps her.
Because what type of mother would do this? Again, Hana's the most mom character in this whole goddamn movie.
Exactly. And we're left with a sob story that the husband threw the baby out. She's been looking for the baby.
And this was it. This was the end. And they're like, okay, and it's clear that both characters have made this huge connection with the baby.
Yep.
Everyone's bawling their eyes out, but okay, it's best to be with its mom, who does love the baby.
Apparently loves the baby.
Yeah, and it does kind of lull you into that sense of like, okay, well, this is it. This is wrapping up the last story, and I'm sure we'll finish up the girls bit right here, and it'll be fine.
Yep. But at this time, we cut to Gin.
Can't leave him out.
Who has gone to the father, and he has learned that the woman is not the true mother.
Yeah.
The dad is a deadbeat.
Oh, yeah.
And,
they've moved into a different apartment, which is...
No, they've separated.
They have separated, but, like, his apartment is hoarder-level disgusting.
It's full of trash.
It is completely full of trash, and he is buying lotto tickets hoping to win money.
He's taking the same route as Gin.
Yes.
And so, we also learned that Midori was pregnant, but she suffered either a miscarriage or a stillbirth, and is not mentally stable.
No, so she has kidnapped this baby from someone else.
Yep. And now Gin is on the race to find Yuki and
get the baby
Hana
back.
And
it's also made clear that, like, while he's talking with the deadbeat husband / ex-husband, that she is so mentally unstable that, like, Gin brings up the idea, well, would she kill herself and the baby? And he's like, no, she definitely wouldn't do that. And he's like, no.
Yeah.
No. You said she full-on kidnapped a baby. We are not leaving this to chance.
Yeah. And so, one thing I actually really like about the background of this...
Yes.
Gin is, as we know, horrible with directions.
Terrible.
And in the background, wherever he goes, the arrow's pointing the way that he takes.
Yes. As if something is guiding him there.
Again... It's level of minuscule detail in this movie.
And, like, honestly, the arrow is something that I don't think you would catch the first time you watch this movie.
No.
Because unlike the other quote-unquote miracles that happen, this one isn't highlighted in any way.
Yeah.
It's just there.
Yeah, again, this is like a movie I've watched, like,
this
handful of times.
Easily a rewatchable one.
Yeah. And so, they reunite. Gin informs them the truth through charades.
Because he's so out of breath from pedaling so fast.
Yeah. And we learn that, the mother is going to commit suicide.
She's going to jump with the baby.
And now they are chasing towards the mother as well. They find the mother. Again, there are signs leading them.
The whole way.
This is happening on New Year's Eve because he finds them outside a temple.
Yes.
That's right. That's the time frame we're in now. And so Midori steals a truck.
She full on steals a truck.
Hana has roped the taxi driver back in.
And is it the same taxi driver?
It's the same taxi driver.
And at this point, you can also argue that there's a small character development for the taxi driver because he's turned into one of the gang at this point in a way.
He's been coerced.
He has, but also not just coerced, because there are multiple points in this chase scene where there's no one else in the car with him. And he could either drive away, or he didn't have to crash his car at the end.
Well,
And he's so invested in helping them get this baby back.
Well, he doesn't even know. He's being kind of forced because they're
at the beginning, yes.
She has Kyoko. Who's Kyoko? Shut up.
Yeah, no, at the beginning, definitely. But you get the sense at the very end of the chase when he's like full on risking his own car and everything.
That maybe partway through, they realize, they explain it to him when they're not in the, like, we're not in the car, we're like, Gin's trying to open the door, that part.
And then on top of that, it's also made clear throughout the background of this part of the movie that this child's kidnapping has been on the radio and the TV quite a lot. Like, full-on kidnapped child, have you seen this baby?
And surprise, surprise, Hana knew.
Yeah.
And so, the truck crashes into an empty lobby of a building.
Yes.
And the mother runs up to the roof, and she is ready to end it all. Where Miyuki tries talking her down, and the mom is in complete psychosis.
She's lost it.
True Satoshi Kon style. Mm-hmm. The child is talking to her. The baby, Kyoko is. The
full baby one. But honestly, I kind of like this portrayal of, like, full-on suicidal, out-of-your-mind crazy thoughts.
This is where this bright movie becomes so dark and heavy.
It does, but at the same time, especially with Western and arguably a little bit older movies, I think, suffered from this a lot, especially because it's not a trope that is portrayed in movies very much anymore.
Yeah.
There's movies, especially Western movies, have a hard time depicting a person who is going through that mental state in a way that makes the audience understand that, like, A, this is not their doing. Like, they are not in control.
Yeah.
And B, like, they can't stop themselves.
Yeah.
And it's usually done in such a way where you're like, oh, you're just sad. Just come down and we'll talk it through and it's fine.
Yeah.
And this one does a really good job of, like, bringing the audience into this woman's, like, world, but not so much that you understand her.
Yeah.
It's enough for you to understand that, like, she's going to do this and there is not a lot you can do to do anything about it.
Yeah, it kind of makes me think of, like, probably the best Western example that is actually related to Kon's work is Perfect Blue and Black Swan.
Yeah, both of those do also really good jobs of trying to get the audience to understand, not necessarily relate, but to understand that, like,
they're not in the right headspace.
They are not, and, like, on top of that, like, there is truly not a whole lot you as a, like, bystander is going to be able to do about this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so as she actually jumps and
holding baby and everything.
Miyuki grabs her. Gin and Hana appear and are trying to help haul her back in as the husband comes out and says, "Hey, we'll
start again."
Because
this is the whole reason she got pregnant the first time, was she thought this would snap her husband out of being a deadbeat. Yep. They would become the happy family that she always wanted. And it didn't happen.
Yeah.
And it broke her.
A great thing with the illustration and animation for this is Midori's hair is distraught.
Oh, yeah.
It is not neat and clean at all.
No. Yeah.
And so she actually has a change of heart. And she's like, if I'm gonna die, I'll die, but take the baby to the real mom.
Yeah.
And so she accidentally drops the baby.
Yep.
And Hana, like a true mother,
leaps off the goddamn building,
grabs the baby, and grabs onto a banister. Or a
banner?
Banner, yeah. Banister's
the thing on the stairwell.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. Words. And so there's this
one last miracle.
Yes, which for me is probably the most. I've been reflecting on this a little bit. Mm-hmm. So Hana,
this is by far the most over the top miracle.
Over the top, but also very Japanese in my mindset.
Yeah,
I'm going to go into it in a little bit.
Okay.
So as Hana grabs the banner tears.
Yes.
And as she's falling, a wind comes. Which, I mean, we've had to deal with tunnel wind with architecture in cities.
Look at you, Chicago.
Oh, God. But it stops the banner enough so that way she lands nicely.
She is gently lowered down like a fucking angel on stage.
Yes, as New Year's Day
rings in.
Comes through breaks through the cityscape.
And she sees that first ray of sun for the new year hit the city.
Yes.
It is hella poetic.
Yeah, oh yeah, it is.
It is the most Hana thing in this movie.
My thing with this, I've actually been thinking about this quite a bit because
it's a big scene.
Well, it's a big scene, but also just wind in general from my observation in Japanese cinema, specifically starting with like Akira Kurosawa.
Oh,
where
yeah,
wind is a heavy.
It's a thing. Yeah,
it's a character in itself. You see it in Yojimbo. You see it in his early works of I think it was Sanjo the Boxer.
Yeah.
Like you see it as used as a character, and then we see it in like Miyazaki's work whenever there's a super emotional movement. There's wind.
There's always wind. And then even on top of that, some of the really old art from Japan, like it's not just mountain and trees, they also bother to paint the wind.
Yes. And so for me, maybe this has been resparked because of Ghost of Tsushima,
which uses wind as a directional element. So
for those who aren't aware, Ghost of Tsushima is it's set in the first Mongol invasion of Japan.
Yes.
Where when the Mongols were fleeing, they were wiped out by a tsunami? No, not tsunami. Typhoon.
A typhoon.
They were wiped out by a typhoon, and then I think it was like 50 so years later, they tried invading again, and another typhoon wiped them out, which created the original use of the term kamikaze, or divine wind.
Yes.
Which this is why this feels so heavily Japanese to me, is because, and maybe it's like how in America we tend to root for the rebellious underdogs because our country's founded on rebellion.
Yeah.
In Japan, it's this, and I'm probably speaking on my ass a little bit, but like,
but no,
there's like the cultural subconscious of the wind being this divine thing.
Well, and I think you have some ground there, because I think even if you take it to a different way, the Western kind of like wishing element is usually star based. We're very much into like, oh, the last wish on the star, third star to the right, moon is important. And like whether or not you believe in that, you can't deny that like the amount of star shit that's in like children's like poetic literature is a lot.
Oh yeah.
And there is a similarity there where I'm not used to seeing necessarily star-based sort of stuff, or even like underdog sort of based stuff.
Yeah.
It's usually some, and I don't even want to say divine, because it's not necessarily divine-based intervention, but a natural force of wind and nature intervention.
Yeah.
Where the world itself doesn't want this to happen.
Yeah, it's just an initial thought for me, because I haven't had time to really explore it in, like, with Ghost of Tsushima.
Yeah,
the guy, instead of trying to like having an arrow direct you, the wind directs you.
Yeah.
The kamikaze.
Yeah, and it is one of those interesting things where it's something to definitely think upon, and it would be an interesting study to look into, like what like quote unquote divine guidance different places in the world have and like typically think of.
Yeah.
But the other thing that kind of like ties all of this back together, I think for me, the thing that I saw, mostly because I haven't been playing
Ghost of Tsushima.
I have only been forced to listen to it while my husband plays it. The thing that connected this scene to the rest of the movie for me, because this scene is a lot.
Yeah.
And it's so much like being narrowly missing 2 different car crashes, and like the fact that Jin is alive at all in this goddamn movie is a miracle.
Yeah.
He gets beaten to death like once, and then he gets in a severe car crash and like doesn't just like, oh, it's a car crash. Like we see him hit a rail.
Yeah.
Like the man is not dead by pure luck.
Oh yeah. No, there's something
going on.
Kyoko is blessed.
Very blessed.
I think we can chalk it up to that right now.
Very much so.
Because otherwise that's a whole deep dive into like Shinto and
there's
stuff
so
that
much
I know
nothing about.
Minimal about.
But the thing that tied this all together for me was the way Hana like delicately lowered herself down, like one foot pointed, the other one popped up behind her. It felt very Angel-esque to me. It
felt very Mary Poppins.
Yes.
Yeah.
And Mary Poppins to me has always felt angel-y. Like she comes at the right time, she leaves at the right time when you don't need her anymore, sort of thing. And so like because of all the other angel references throughout the rest of the movie, like that's what tied it all together for me. But I can see where you're going, because the wind bit was so like it's heavy-handed. Yeah, exactly.
And so now the trio is in the hospital.
Because that's where they belong, goddammit.
Yes.
No one is healthy here.
complaining that Kyoko is no longer Kyoko.
Yeah, their parents had named the baby, surprise.
And then Hana moves on to complaining that...
This is the men's ward.
Yes, exactly. And Gin is smoking, even though he's not supposed to.
Yep.
And the real parents are outside, and the man with them asks if they really want to talk to them because...
They're homeless, sure?
Are you really sure? And they're like, we don't care.
Anyone who cares for a baby this much deserves to be godparents.
Yeah, we want them to be the godparents. And as the door opens, Miyuki and her father are reunited. He was the man on the train.
Yep, he's the inspector who's been following this whole thing.
Yep. And the baby laughs.
Everyone laughs.
As the credit begins to roll,
yeah,
Tokyo begins to dance.
In a very cute, cartoony sort of way.
Yes, which I love this ending because everything is wrapped up. Everything, it's not defined, but it's all hopeful potential.
Yeah, I like the potential, and I like that there's not a hard, we don't know exactly what's wrong with Hana. We don't know exactly if Jin goes back to be with his daughter and get off the streets. Yeah. And we honestly don't know if Miyuki goes back to live with her parents. Yeah. She's found them. She has the opportunity to apologize and do that if she wants, but she's proven she doesn't need to. Yeah. I mean, it's a good ending. Yeah, it is a very good ending. Yep. And one thing I do want to bring up about the music, it was done by Keiichi Suzuki. Mm-hmm. He's of a band, which I didn't get to listen to any of this. I was busy. Yeah, it was a busy week. Hachimitsu Pai and the Moonriders. Cute. I know the name The Moonriders, but I don't know what from, though. Okay. Also, it's good music, though. So the end of the movie actually ends with Symphony Number 9. Mm-hmm. And Kon wanted it to be done by the Moonriders, and he wanted it to be something different. He didn't just want the Symphony Number 9 to end it. And they took it and they made it like a ska. Yeah, it's cute. It's cute. It's very cute. It fits the uplifting, playfulness of the entire movie. Very much so. Yeah. Yeah. And so, yeah, I don't know. For me, part of what Tokyo Godfathers is so impactful that is instead of the illusions being present like his other works, the illusions are more straightforward in the words that the characters put forth and describe themselves. Mm-hmm. It's kind of like be careful who you want to portray yourself as. Yes. But yeah. I don't know. It's an interesting perspective for me. Yeah, I also think this movie does a really nice job of giving the lesson of you are who you want to be. Yeah. Regardless of your situation in life, regardless of where or how you are what you project out to be. Exactly. And I like this movie's upbeatness without diminishing any of the problems that any of these characters have. Because that's something, especially for Western drama movies, is we do struggle with that a lot. It's usually either much too humorous or comedic, or it's a very dark, heavy movie. Yeah. And we do struggle with trying to find that balance in Western films with, the world doesn't have to be the dark, sad place, but there's problems. Yeah. And so I like this movie's interpretation and view of all of these things, and I also really like the writing for this. Oh, yeah. Not just in the detail, which we've harped on so much, but the fluidity that this crazy train of a story plot goes on. Yeah. None of it feels out of place at any point. None of it feels forced. None of it feels impractical or impossible. Yeah. Even though if you just looked at it on paper, is a wild ride. Oh yeah. But it all fits. Well, there's no lulls in story, there's no lulls in action or comedy. It all flows perfectly. Yeah. And, part of what made me rethink a lot of animation recently is my brother sent me this review, and I wish I had written it down. This guy reviewing one of our favorite animated films, Tech on Concrete. Oh, yeah. Which a lot of people still don't know about. And I think the guy found the movie the same way my brother and I did. We found it in bargain bins. That's how I think a lot of people were introduced to this. Yeah. Yeah. And so I feel, specifically with Tokyo Godfathers,
why it worked as an animation and not a live action movie is because it took risks.
It did.
And all Kon's works have. And I've kind of been looking back on like some of the animes and other stuff I've watched, and they're entering this level of like, and this is in that video as well, about safety in anime.
Yeah.
Like
there's tropes that are we're gonna do well.
Not necessarily just that, but because it's become such a pop culture thing, that they're not taking the risks that they used to do in the 80s and 90s.
Oh yeah.
So like, and not just in like storytelling, because we've had some great stories.
Oh yeah, sure.
But in animation in general, where Kon likes to go between like reality and fiction, and even his animation style goes between that, where the caricature and real life, but
yeah, you see it really well with how characters were drawn in the 80s and 90s.
Yeah.
There was like huge gaps in between, like, that is not what a human looks like.
Oh yeah, and you talk about your shoujo stuff where
we'd love it. Yeah. But yeah, like noodle arms out the Godzoo.
Oh yeah.
But yeah, and it wasn't always in one direction. It wasn't like, oh, well, that's just the style of the times. Because there were, but like, it fluctuated in between, like, that's too big for a person, that's too long for a person's arms to be, but like, no one cared. Well, it was just like someone experimenting with like, oh, I want giant eyes on my person.
Yeah, and like for me, like I'm mainly invested and have been in show and manga.
Sure.
And anime. Well, and the thing for me is like, once Naruto and Bleach kind of established what was popular, One Piece is popular, but it's one of those styles that you can't imitate. But Naruto and like Bleach, and to an extent Death Note, you all have that. They all have the same kind of art style. Like One Punch Man's art style is very similar to My Hero Academia. Like
there's definitely a current flavor.
Yeah, where like we don't really see that as much anymore. And like I think the most recent one I saw was The Night a Short Girl Walk On, where like the animation style is truly unique, and it doesn't. It's its own thing.
There's nothing else like it.
Yeah,
and I think we're in a kind of a weird spot because I agree with you. A lot of especially popular shows right now, while the story might be phenomenal, like we've seen some really great stories come out recently. There is a really safe look to a lot of it. I think the place where we're seeing the artists who are still gutsy enough to try and make their own style, not just in like character development, but I've been starting to see like full different styles of drawing where it looks almost like newspaper characters from like the old days, like Snoopy style.
Yeah.
Or like it's full colored book that's got like one thing on a page as opposed to full panels.
Yeah.
Like there's definitely some people still trying to experiment and push those boundaries, but they're not necessarily either the ones that are getting mainstream recognition, at least in the West.
Yeah.
Or they are not ones that are being developed for TV and movies. They're
works of passion.
Yeah. And there's a reason for that. Like, it's easy to get a bunch of people who can all draw that one style because you practiced it. And so it's easier to get a bigger team to then make those productions. And we've seen, especially when we were first getting into anime, a lot of this was like one or two people who did this all day, every day, and like you did it till you dropped or you got famous.
Yeah.
And there's definitely still that mindset, I think, for sure, but I think it's a lot easier to find a company or a team to back you now. Yeah,
like the now unfortunately defunct Kyoto Studios.
Exactly.
Where like all their stuff had a very similar feel. Same with like the same studio who's done like Summer Wars, The Boy and the Beast. Like it has like it's a distinct enough style, and you know it's that studio's work. Same with like Miyazaki's work, where Miyazaki's work has which
backgrounds are Miyazaki's.
Exactly.
Oh yeah.
And even then, like Miyazaki has changed to an extent as well, because
it's evolved.
A lot of his early works have a very European Western influence.
Oh yeah.
Then you get into like Spirited Away, The Wind Rises, Princess Mononoke, Kiki's Delivery Service. Like, Kiki's is still very Westernized, but like Pompoko.
Yeah. And like you can also kind of see with these bigger studios that did do well and were able to continue on, where they you can see where it didn't just become a style, but a stagnation.
Yeah.
And
I think we are in the next stagnation, honestly.
I think we are. And I think in Japan, I think they are probably going to see that break before we do.
Yeah.
Because I know that there's a lot of characters over there that... Because we were going through a list of, like, longest animes the other day.
Yeah, and we were surprised, like, some of this stuff's been writing from, like, the 60s.
Yeah, and I know of the characters, but I haven't seen the show, but I know of the characters because they're on stationery, or they're stickers, or on pins.
Like, Crayon Shin-chan.
Exactly, who... I don't know anyone who's watched any of it here unless you're really interested in who this character is. Yeah. But you know what he looks like.
Exactly.
And so I think that with that being kind of more normalized as they go, because this is a full style, it's had time to develop there.
Yeah.
I do think that we are plateaued enough that we're going to see a break soon.
Yeah.
And I know right now the trend is for more cartoony-esque things, which isn't bad. That's not a bad thing.
And heavy integration of CGI.
Which we've seen a lot of, but we've also seen it starting to look good. And it's starting to work. Yeah. There's a couple of movies that use it that, honestly, I don't mind it. It's fine. It's not my taste, but it's fine.
Yeah, it's whatever.
Yeah, and then we've also seen some where the story was good enough to keep it flowing.
Yeah. And honestly, I think that's one thing that Kon's work, tying it back into it and to kind of wrap things up, is that Kon feels like he's very much the end of what we probably see as like the early 2000s era of when we really started getting into this stuff.
Yeah, there's definitely the face shapes, the eye shapes are memorable enough and different enough to set him apart.
It's also the craft.
Yes, and the level of detail.
Yeah, that honestly is in some ways dying, unfortunately.
Yeah, I think so, but, I think there's enough people who this is quickly becoming a classic. There are people who watch Tokyo Godfathers every Christmas. Yeah. And I think once something becomes classical, that's when people realize that they could try that themselves. Yeah. And that's kind of what I'm hoping for, is I'm really hoping that now that people are starting to see these 80s and 90s and even early 2000s works as classical pieces of anime as opposed to just like the thing you grew up with. Yeah. I think that we will start seeing people being like, I actually really like how people drew things in the 80s. I'm going to go back to it. Yeah. Or I'm going to reimagine it or that sort of thing.
Yeah, I don't know. It's weird because we're also making commentary on stuff that's potentially happening / we're speculating.
Yeah, we're hoping.
We're speculating based off things we've seen in the past.
Yeah, and we know that stuff loops around. It always does. Yes. And I wouldn't be mad if this style came back. It's beautiful.
Exactly. And speaking of looping around,
yes,
Chris, would you recommend Tokyo Godfathers?
Yes, to everyone. Even if you're not a huge anime person, this isn't an anime movie. No. This is an animated anime film. Yeah. If that makes sense. But yeah, this is a fantastic movie. It's really, like, there isn't necessarily like if you're this, don't watch it. No, just this movie's great. Watch it.
Oh yeah. I will say definitely watch this with one caveat. Don't watch the English dubbing. The English dubbing is very rough.
It is rough. However, with that said, it is not the worst I've ever watched.
No, it's not Cane Day.
No, it is not Cane Day. Oh god, Cane Day. But at the same time, if you can read the subtitles, it is better. Yeah. But if you can't, don't feel like you shouldn't watch this. Yeah. The English version is passable. It's not great, but honestly, if you didn't know any different, you're not going to know any different.
Yeah, it's no Miyazaki film. No. But it's no Cane Day.
It's no Cane Day. It's totally watchable. And honestly, if you're starting off into this world of anime movies, you won't notice. I promise. This is something that's for those of us who have like beaten this sort of dubbing into the ground. Yes. Then you'll notice. But otherwise, this will fly right over and you won't notice at all, I promise.
To an extent, I guess.
And most of it.
Yeah. So, anywho, this has been The Good, the Bad, and the Weird.
Thanks for listening.
Peace, and hopefully this year's a good year.
It will be.
We'll see.
Make it.
Sure. Peace.